Today marks 5 years of being completely debt-free,
I'm debt-free!
where I was able to pay off over $85,000 of debt in under 2.5 years. But not only that, since then I've been able to quadruple my income and build a multi-six-figure net worth that's growing every single day. So how exactly did I go from broke shopaholic to someone who is finally building real wealth? I'll tell you that if I hadn't changed my money habits or my money mindsets that I had when I was first paying off my debt, it would have taken me closer to 12 years to pay off. So today I'm going to share with you not only how to fix your money habits, but I'm going to give you the exact roadmap I took to becoming completely debt-free and to build real wealth. Starting with the simplest thing I did that ended up making the biggest impact, especially when I realized that I was broke as hell, and that was I Googled how to stop shopping. I remember feeling a little bit ridiculous doing that too, because why would anyone need to Google on how to stop spending money? But the second I did that was the moment that I realized that I wasn't alone in this. I started discovering things like YouTube videos, Reddit forums, Facebook groups. Tons of people were talking about how they were struggling with overconsumption and how they wanted to get themselves out of debt. And even though it felt a little embarrassing and cringe, I'm actually really glad that I did that because it ended up taking me on the path that I'm on today. In 2019, I kind of hit a rock bottom moment where I ended up buying a pair of boots that cost more than my rent at the time, and I had every opportunity to return them. To me, these boots symbolized every version of my fantasy self that I wanted to be. They were cool, they were going to make me the cool girl, they were expensive so that if you looked at my feet, it would be like, hey, if you know, you know. But at the same level, I knew that every single day I would wake up stressing about money and wondering how the hell I was going to pay off my remaining $85,000 of student loan debt. Because I knew that I was making good money and I felt like I had done everything right. I had gone to college, I had gotten a good job, I moved to a big city out on my own. On paper, I was good. But behind the scenes of all of that, I was completely broke and struggling. And instead of doing what I knew was the responsible thing and returning these boots, I put them back in the box, I slid them under my bed, and I walked away. And it was in that moment of self-sabotage that I could feel in my bones that I knew something needed to change. But it was from that simple Google search that I not only felt less alone, but I started to learn exactly what I needed to do next with my money. Which brings me into step 2, and that is to do a spending audit. In order to move forward with paying off your debt, you need to know a couple of things. One is that you need to look back at your past to figure out how you got to your present. And 2 is that you need to know exactly how much you make and how much you spend in order to move forward. And when I first committed to paying off my debt, I had no idea where my money was going. I knew that I made some money. I knew that I even made good money, but I had no idea what I was spending it on. I couldn't tell you exactly what my phone bill was or what day it came out. I couldn't tell you how much I spent on gas or groceries every single month, and I definitely couldn't tell you how much I was spending on clothes and makeup. I had to actually face and take a look at exactly where my money was going, and let me tell you, it was uncomfortable. So what I did was set aside a couple of hours, and I just took a look at all of my credit card statements and my debit card statements from the past 6 months. And I started going through every single line of my spending with a fine-tooth comb. Because one of the first steps that everybody talks about if you want to become debt-free is to start budgeting, the spending analysis is what's going to tell you exactly how much you need to budget where. So this is an absolutely critical step that you need to take. And if you're an overspender like I was, then you will probably feel pretty embarrassed and quite frankly pissed off at yourself doing this. But on the same token, this is going to be extremely powerful information that you're giving yourself. Because once you've done your spending audit, you're going to know the exact numbers. You're going to know how much you need to live, and you're going to be able to find the opportunities where you can cut back to put more money down on that debt. This is your opportunity to stop having an avoidant attachment style to your finances. If you're really serious about paying off debt and buckling down with your finances, then this is an absolutely critical step that you need to take. And once you've done your spending analysis, like I said, you might get a little bit pissed. But this is exactly where you can use that emotion to your advantage. Embrace getting mad, embrace getting embarrassed, and embrace getting a bit sad. Because that raw emotion that you feel once you look at the numbers is the exact thing that you can use to get yourself started. Feeling emotions like guilt or shame is very normal, and having things like debt or even being an overspender doesn't make you a bad person. But if you're trying to make a change, you can use that emotion to kickstart your journey. And that's exactly what I did. Because even thinking about it now, I know that I'm a smart person, I'm a rational person, and so are you. But just having the know-how and knowledge that I was potentially overspending, it just wasn't enough. It really did get me to take action and to start thinking about what my life would be like without debt. You'll finally be able to build your emergency fund and stop living paycheck to paycheck. You might be able to travel once a year. You might be able to treat your parents and your friends to a nice dinner without worrying about the bill. Using those emotions on top of finding your why is a critical step in getting started and to keep you going when things get tough. There's a saying that I think rings true where I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired, and that's the energy that I used to get started. The critical thing that I had to do was that I had to stop pretending that there wasn't a problem, and I had to realize that nobody was going to come save me. I was waiting for it, believe me. I would have loved someone to swoop in and be like, hey, okay, I'm just going to pay off your debt. But I realized that I was the one that had to do it. So use that emotion, find your why, and use it to start taking the action that you've been avoiding. And now that you're fired up, it's going to take you right into step 4, which is writing your first budget. I don't care who you are and how much money you make, you need a budget. And I know I probably lost a lot of you when I said the word budget, but it is the number one money habit that I still do even to this day because it gives you control over where your money is going. Your budget is basically your plan. You tell your money where to go instead of always just chasing after it and wondering where it went. And now that you've actually done your spending analysis, it'll take you like 15 minutes to write your first budget. It's really easy because now you know exactly how much money you make and how much you spend. And you can find categories in your budget that you're willing to cut back on in order to put that extra money towards your debt. And let me tell you, when I wrote my first budget and cut out all the extra nonsense like clothes, makeup, and takeout temporarily, and don't worry, we'll get to that, I felt like I got a raise because I could see the real numbers of how much money I was wasting on those things and how much more money I could potentially put towards my debt to get out of debt that much faster. And I would recommend not wasting too much time on how exactly you're going to budget and what tool you're going to use. These days, I use my very own budgeting template, which is available linked in the description down below, but you can use literally anything. For years, I used an app, I used an Excel spreadsheet. Whatever works for you to keep track of your money, just stick to it and do it. And if you want to see exactly how to write a realistic budget and keep track of it throughout the month, I did do a whole video on exactly how I budget with real numbers from my actual bank account in this video right here. So you can go watch that after this video. But the whole key about budgeting is not necessarily to think about it as something that restricts you, but rather gives you control and more freedom over your money. When I was in debt, budgeting was the tool that I used to find more money to put down on my debt. Now that I'm debt-free, budgeting is actually the tool that I still use to give me freedom over my spending. Nowadays, I use my budget to actually spend more on the things that I care about rather than restricting myself. So a budget really isn't all about living as cheaply as possible or cutting back. It's a tool that you can use to have control over your finances and take them in the direction that you want to go. If you're the type of person who feels really chaotic about your money and you just have no idea where it's going, the budget is the thing that's going to give you back control. It's actually pretty cool. This next step, a lot of you may not want to hear, but it is absolutely critical if you want to aggressively pay off your debt fast. And that is you need to start cutting shit out of your life for a while. For just a little while. As in, challenge yourself to go on a temporary no buy or low buy. And that's exactly what I did. I was so motivated to pay off my debt as quickly as possible that I was more than willing to cut the crap from my budget. But I will say that if you absolutely refuse to make any adjustments in your current spending habits, then you're going to have to accept that you're just not going to be able to pay off that debt as fast as you might want to. That's simply the reality of it. If you have a really ambitious money goal, you can reach it quickly by doing two things. One is by cutting down your lifestyle, and two is by increasing your income. And I would say one of the fastest ways to free up money in your budget is to cut out any excess spending. But this does not have to be forever. So my advice here would be to structure your budget so that it's challenging, so that you're making progress towards your debt, but make sure that it's not uber restrictive or unsustainable in the long run, because you're just going to rebel. But either way, the reality is that you're likely going to have to cut a lot of spending in your budget, which may leave you needing to replace a lot of your old bad habits. So this is where you need to find your dopamine menu. Because if you're a spendy person like I was, you're also likely removing your number one coping mechanism, which for me was shopping. And since you're committing to no longer doing that anymore and putting that money down on your debt, you need to find new things to replace that behavior. Because even though I was fired up and motivated to pay off my debt, a few days in, I was already starting to feel the withdrawal. I started to realize that I was using shopping as my way to cope with stress, to cope with boredom. And if I didn't introduce new ways to deal with that, then I was going to go rolling right back into the way I was. And I think if you talk to a lot of people on their debt-free journey, they will tell you that they started finding new hobbies and new things to do. At the time, this is where I leaned into things like building up my YouTube channel and making videos. It was literally sharing my debt-free journey online that helped me build up this community that I have today. I started decluttering and going through my things. I went to workout classes or did workouts on YouTube to spend some time. Basically, you need to find new things that you enjoy doing that, one, occupy your time, but two, that stop you from spending too much money. Because at the end of the day, you're doing two things here. You're breaking old bad habits and you need to build up new ones to replace them. And if I'm honest, it's actually kind of fun. A lot of the times, if you find yourself overspending, we're more used to consuming rather than creating. This really flips that script. And at the end of the day, I think it really makes you feel more accomplished and proud of yourself. This next part of the debt-free journey, I think not a lot of people talk about enough, and it's the fact that you can only cut your expenses so much. And for a lot of people, the debt is not necessarily a result of overspending like it was for me. It's also the simple fact that the cost of living is astronomical and wages have not kept up. So a lot of folks who do have debt have it because they're just trying to survive. And you can't necessarily budget your way out of situations like that. I can completely appreciate that, but I will say that one of the only things that you can do if that is you is to increase your income. And if you do have the option to cut back on expenses and increase your income at the same time, then that is going to be the fastest way that you can pay off your debt quickly. In addition to cutting non-essential spending from my budget, I also started working more. I ended up doing overtime. I took extra shifts on weekends and evenings. And on top of all that, I eventually started making extra money through my content. But at the same time, I will say that it's not easy and it can take a long time. I wouldn't put all your eggs in that basket, but there's definitely other ways that you can look into earning more money. You can do things like negotiate for a raise at your job. Or do you have a skill or hobby that you're particularly good at? Could you potentially start teaching classes? Could you sell an ebook or mini course on how to do that? Can you bake? Can you sew? Can you style people? Can you write an exercise program? I believe that everyone has a skill that they can teach and share, and I feel like there's opportunities there to share that. But the key here is that as you make more money, any of that extra money you put towards your debt until it's gone. That's exactly what I did, and in addition to cutting out my expenses temporarily, increasing that income really sped up the process. This next step, I think not enough people talk about, but it's that you have to find joy in the process. If it feels absolutely miserable the entire time, then you're probably not going to stick to it. Because for a lot of us, paying off debt is a long game. So if the entire time all I could ever think about was what I couldn't buy and how restricted I felt, then I would never have stuck to it. But if I actually look back on my journey, this was probably one of the times where I felt the most happiest and the most confident about myself. And I think it was because I was making real progress. I was sticking to my plan. I was doing the things I said I was going to do when I said I was going to do it. And any extra money that I made or saved, I put down on my debt. And I ended up getting pretty obsessed with watching that number go down. I kind of gamified it. And that's what I encourage you to do too. If you do things like track your progress, find joy in decluttering and selling things, getting rid of things, if you can find ways to enjoy the process and track your progress, then I think you're going to have a lot more fun with this than you might think. I enjoyed doing things like decluttering and finding more things to sell so I could put that money down on my debt. I made sure to celebrate every extra payment that I made in that month, and figuring out ways to get that number to go down faster kind of became my new motivation. Which is kind of cool because instead of spending money on crap that I didn't need to feel that bit of pride and happiness, putting money down on my debt did it for me instead. Which is also really cool because that was an act of true self-care, whereas buying things to treat myself was me just self-sabotaging in disguise. So make sure you find ways to enjoy this process and have some fun with it, because future you is really going to thank you. This step is something that you can save in your back pocket for when you do finally pay off your debt or when you're just about to. And that's acknowledging the fact that you've now set a new set of standards for yourself. Because if you're paying off debt, you're doing something hard. And even though the goal is to get that number to zero, it's actually the habits and the systems that you've built along the way. Because when that number eventually gets to zero, you are going to be a completely different person. You have built new habits, new systems, new ways of thinking, and you've probably built a whole lot of self-confidence along your journey. I especially know that I did. Because the entire time that I was paying off my debt, I realized that I was taking action to become the type of person who was good with their money. I realized I became the type of person who kept promises to herself. I became the type of person who could say no to herself. And I even became the type of person who could say yes guilt-free because now I started thinking about my purchases instead of just making them based on emotion or impulse. If you go on a debt-free journey, you are not going to come out the same person. And I think it's really important that you acknowledge that and make sure that you put systems in place so that you don't go backwards. Which is exactly why now, even though I've been debt-free for over 5 years, I still budget every single month. I still track every dollar I spend. And now I do things like save and invest before I go and spend any fun money. The debt-free journey is what built me a new set of habits and standards when it comes to my money, and they're habits and standards that I maintain to this very day. That, you know what, I wouldn't have learned or built if I didn't do this. But like I said, none of that really works if you're not actively managing your money from day to day. So go watch this video next where I break down exactly how you're going to write your first budget step by step with real numbers from my own bank account. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye.